Gray drizzle threads the nursery lintel and makes every drip an opinion. The rushes underfoot are tacky with milk and last night's bravery. Minders test their shush like Coopers test hoops. Tap here, squeeze there, pretend it isn't mostly show. The story chair sits a little higher than it needs to on its dais, a rail running between the chair, and the beds, like a line even dreams must obey. You are the newest night warden on Drouse watch, stake bag at your hip, a coil of woolen hush cord in your fist, tally slate and penknife under your arm, a bag of pounce that smells like crushed shells, a pot of red ochre, a sand glass with 2 polite lungs, and a sprig of lavender whose job is quieter than its legend. If you like watching a room learn to behave without anyone needing to roar, walk with me, tap subscribe and ring the bell. We'll peg the bedtime lane, flip the glass, and make quiet do the work. Orders are plain because their consequences aren't. Peg a cord from story chair to beds. Hang the board, crowns off after story, where small hands must read it to climb. Check the roll of small majesties. Post the rule, 7 breaths, then bells. A page mutters for bravery. Princes don't nap. The chief nurse points her staff, the one that Rap's measure kept, toward a lordling who cost a night last week by roaring through the lullaby. Make quiet do the work, she says. You kneel and chalk the first line across the rushes. Peg taps, tap tap, turn, tap. The hush cord snakes under your palm as if it means to be mischief if you don't make it law. You give it a new story, straight from story chair rail to the cot row mouth, shallow arc where the bench lane kinks, seam to the door where defiance is born. Cord too near and pride cheats. Crowns lean across it and turn rules into toys. Cord too far and courage spills into noise. The nap becomes theater. Either way, the rule must be up before the hush horn peals down. Rail. The minder with sensible shoulders palms a peg and rams it home with that tender force only people who have carried toddlers possess. You plumb the story chair rail, post to post, eye to chalk line, until its curve reads like intention rather than collapse. You stamp footing round the cots so the first feet to touch straw don't skate into an excuse for shouting. 2 chalk rings bloom, one at 2 paces from the dais for mouths that think volume has weight, one tight to the rail for hands that need somewhere to stop. The board goes where small elbows must brush it, crowns off after story. You paint in red ochre thick enough to embarrass anyone who pretends they cannot read it. Under the big hand you write in smaller letters, 7 breaths, then bells. False sleep, no sweet, whispers only after bell. A cot creaks. The page with the big mouth decides to climb it like a siege tower. You tap the hush cord with one finger and his foot remembers the floor. Your face does the work a paragraph would ruin. He looks at the cord again and learns it is not a ribbon for tying bows, but a string for keeping a world in tune. Hidden worlds, ride under your bracers. Last winter's barred mischief list, no snoring as a joke, no crown tapping while others breathe, no goat tails during lavender time. A spare bag of mint for wobbly tummies. Hand signs, 2 fingers down, step, flat palm, hold, fist low down. Pocket drill for small tyrants and big lungs. Set feet, breathe, close. You mark a quiet seam from door to beds, ochre dots 2 boot widths wide where story must stop and grammar begin. You tie a red thread to the first peg and look along the cord until the room sees the line too. The nurse's eye drops to your cord hand and stays there long enough to give your knuckles manners. You ease the arc at the rail a thumb, where the rushes are slick with secrets. She notices. She does not smile. This is permission. The sand glass whispers. When you tip it, grains become law. You hold the glass where the smallest eyes can see it. You set it on the dais lip where the largest egos must respect it. 7 breaths is our bargain, you think at the room. 7 in, 7 out. 7 that belong to nobody in particular and save everybody effort. The hush horn peals. Down, the usher says in a voice made of pounce and patience. Mats accept backs and elbows. The crowns go on the rail like small planets that have agreed to share a sky. You count aloud in the language the hall permits. Quiet fingers, patient face. 1. Lavender passes to a child whose jaw has opinions. 2. Pounce dust settles on the docket. 3. A minder palms a peg near a restless heel. 4. The nurse taps the staff once, measure kept. 5. The loudest chest remembers it can be a pillow. 6. The last crown rolls into your palm without a fight. 7. The bell kisses the rail like a polite gavel. First down wakes first. First awake speaks first. The room begins to learn that shame for poor form stings longer than thunder. You log it as it breathes. Crowned first, Ellen. Uncrowned first, Ellen. Order, 1. False sleep, 0. The slate likes neatness. The rushes like silence. A princelet tries the oldest gambit. Hold your breath on 6, Popeyes on 7, shout awake, as if timing were triumph. You have the mint sprig ready. He bites it by reflex and discovers that mouths can be retrained. Whispers after bell. You tell him without lips, and he whispers it back like a secret he invented. The facts become sounds. Peg taps, red ochre drying on board, sandglass pour, hush horns low request, bell's polite insistence, staff raps small thunder, pounce dust like snow on a parchment that prefers ink to fingerprints. The hush chord's soft complaint, when pride leans and learns better. You check the roll of small majesties and pounce the names to stop greasy fingers ghosting the ink. Eric, Elin, Bragi, Sigrid, Tor, Halla. You chalk a thin ring at each cot foot so wandering feet have somewhere respectable to land. The nurse nods. This is all anyone can ask from toddlers and dukes. The journeyman outside mutters new courage. Princes don't nap. You set your finger on the glass and mark its waste. Princes breathe, you murmur to nobody and everyone. Then bells. Story, the usher whispers. The reader starts with the one about the ship that brought cinnamon and a polite plague. Because the lesson is better when it doesn't need a pointing finger. Halfway through, a lordling who was born to interrupt drags his crown along the cord as if it were a mast and he a storm. Down, you sign, fist low. He holds the crown up, helpless like a sailor's hat in wind, and lets you take it to the rail. You set it next to Ellen's like a tiny treaty. He closes his eyes for 2 and forgets to reopen them for 4. This is how empires are saved, one borrowed breath at a time. An inkpot tips. Somebody colored an outrage too hard while adding a column for no sweet. You slide your wrist under the black tide and save the line that counts. False sleep equal to no sweet, seam talk equal to mint, then fine, elbow across cord equal to fine, then mat lost. 3 strokes drown. Your head writes them back while your hand blots and your mouth moves 2 cots with finger signs. Step, hold. So the cord stays an idea instead of a rope. A friar palms you a chit from the governess, wax attempting to make favor into law. Open by order, the face lies. Nearer cord for a certain bed, the whisper means. You put it in the drawer that kills paper gently and tie a yellow ribbon on the nearest peg as a private joke your conscience approves. You parse today's hidden danger, unless you write it down. False doze. Your column waits. Lordling elm, dot. The nurse sees it over your shoulder and decides to talk about porridge tomorrow with his tutor. No theater. Arithmetic. The nurse raps the staff twice when someone tries to smuggle a yawn into a lullaby. Measure kept, she says without speaking. Her eyes land on your cord hand. Leave it, return, leave. It is the look of someone who knows her orchestra has a new second violin that can be trusted with the hard parts. If it were your hall, if a page said princes don't nap, how close would you set the hush chord at first light, nearer for bite or wider for safety? Put your vote in where you're watching from below. I count them when the pounce dust washes from my fingers and the hush horn asks whether the chord belongs on the rushes again. You pace the quiet seam once more. Pegs sit like tame teeth. The cord holds without being pulled. The board says crowns off after story in letters slippers can't ignore. The glass empties itself with the slow content of somebody doing the one good job they know how to do. You flip it, 7 becomes 7 again. The bell taps. First down wakes first. Whisper, the usher allows. A girl whose braids can be used to swing a bell if not supervised whispers that the ship with cinnamon smelled like ships and not like a prince. Her neighbor tells her crowns off after story in a voice like a secret. Your slate picks up their order without having to scold. The nurse breathes out. The hall believes itself kind for reasons that look like rules. A cot creaks. A toddler considers learning to roar. You stand where he can see your hand and count to 2 with your fingers before you get to 3 with your mouth. He stops to see if 3 arrives. You do not deliver it. He closes his eyes instead. Perhaps this is justice. Perhaps it is craft. Whatever it is quiet. By the time the sand is spilled twice, the room has learned its new rhyme. Fewer words, more work. You pull the cord a hair tighter, where a knee wanted to creep, and hang the sprig of lavender lower on the rail where noses can find it without permission. You make a note to air the crowns at lull, and to remind the page with lids like banners that he owns a mint leaf and a spine. You hang the rule where slippers must see it to pass. You breathe the 7th breath with everyone else because you are a person and not a peg. The horn will say down again in a breath. You will be ready, set feet, breathe, close. Then bells, then order, then whispers, then sleep. The rest of the night can argue about dragons in the wallpaper and whether goats are princes. Your job is to make toy crowns weigh just enough to teach without hurting, to make a chord become law, to make quiet do the work. Dew slicks the rushes and decides the nursery is its kingdom. The hush chord is cold in your palm. Pegs knock a little tune your wrist knows by heart. Routine is the law that lets courage stay civil, and lets princes learn their people when the lamps go down. Before moon, peg the lane. Tap tap, turn, tap. Run the chord true. No swales for pride to pool in, no proud humps for stories to trip over. Pounce the roster, ground shell sifted soft across the first leaf so ink will bite where truth must stick. Chalk 2 rings at the cot row, 1 at 2 paces for mouths that think volume is weight, 1 tight to the rail for hands that need a place to stop. At the horn, lie, still, hush. At the bell, crowns off, order posted, whispers aloud. At lull, swap frayed hush straps for waxed. Saturday slack is dead. Dry strap first keeps small hands from blaming weather for their tremble, and drag a laundry rope between uprights to air the crowns and spare blankets. You draft the rota in neat chalk, hush staffs to seams 1 per, bell runners to corners glass flipped, bell tapped, reserves to the door to widen on order. They will pretend boredom now, and be grateful when boredom becomes space. Your job sits on your knuckles. Set the lying sequence. Tie colored ribbons on crowns where a glance will do the work of a speech. White for story on heads for once upon, blue for whisper, aloud after bell, yellow for water, carried before any tears rent the treaty. Your ledger opens and learns 4 verbs again, pegged, down, heard set by. The nurse's stylus whispers them into wax as if numbers are talismans. Peg taps, chord hum, sandglass hisses as barley falls, the horn peals its low down, breath before bedtime, the note that gives order a spine. The bell for up waits like a polite gavel. The small majesties pretend they are not learning, they are. The provost arrives with a small book that wants to be a conscience, and boots that prefer tile to rush. Inspection, he says, rehearsed, eyes on the chord as if the word makes lines true. Let him through, and you stir gossip. They're cooking the order. Bar him and he leaves with the same sentence salted to taste. Either way, the tide of yawns won't wait. You scrape a peg tip across the seam, threshold only, and hand him your sweet book instead. Posted. Read. Vinegar first. He leans, sees dew and chalk and no theater, and becomes furniture without suing for a role. Some evening always tips an ink pot. Tonight it chooses your sweet book. You jam your wrist under the flood and save the line that counts. False doze equal to no sweet, seam talk equal to mint then coin. Elbow across chord equal to coin then mat lost. 3 strokes drown. Your head writes them back while your hand blots and your mouth moves 2 cots with finger signs. Step, hold, down, so the chord stays an idea instead of a rope. 2 cots swap places. Habit outruns instruction. You redress the ring in shadow while a lantern crawls closer, half files trade, a sleeve tug, a palm down. The chord remains true. The hush keeps pretending it planned this. The nurse's staff raps once for measure kept and twice when a laugh tries to become a rule. The glass turns into a metronome everyone can hear. Horn, down. Breath 1, 2, 3, lavender passes. 4, 5, pounce settles. 6, staff rap. 7, bell taps up. First down wakes first, first awake whispers first. You log who crowned first, who uncrowned first, who pretended and paid. False doze, 1 vinegar, lordling elm, dot. Order, Elin, then Tor, then Hala. White ribbon glows on a crown, story. The child's jaw thinks it outranks the bell. You hold up your palm, hold, and point to the glass. They count barley instead of dragons. They survive their own mouth. Blue ribbon breathes on the next. Whisper. She tries to slide closer to the dais while still down. You tow the mat back and chalk a ring under its corner. She discovers gravity has opinions. Set feet, breathe. Close, you lend her the pocket drill. She obeys. The bell taps. She wakes into her sentence instead of stumbling into it. Yellow ribbon waits on the rail. Water. 3 children learn that raising a hand at 2 is better than crying at 6. A minder crosses the seam with a cup and does not narrate his service. The usher marks the order and the nurse marks the blankets behind each breath. Blankets persuade better than oaths. Oaths remind blankets they're being watched. Wax blocks thud as straps get rubbed sensible. Dry strap first. You hear from benches you weren't near. A good rule travels without you. Corruption wears its old coat. A porter offers extra heads closer beds to a lord whose mouth has always thought proximity equals dignity. Your look performs subtraction, and his fingers learn to count to none. A cousin waves a folded open by order for nearer cord. The wax smells like pocket. You flatten it with your palm until it remembers paper is furniture, not command. There is a second secret slate in your coat. 3 lordlings who never take yellow water turns. You erase one name because last night he took yellow without making you hunt him. The other 2 you carry into tomorrow like a thorn you intend to pluck when you've earned the grip. The horn peals for down again. You sweep the line with lavender, policy, not pity, and it makes small noses believe the floor is a friend. The bell kisses the rail, and the room wakes into order again. The nurse's staff raps once, measure kept. If the provost wanted inside the cord to quiet rumor, would you let him inside inspection or keep him threshold only? Put your vote and where you're watching from below. I count them when the pounce dust washes from my fingers and the hush cord asks whether it belongs on the rushes again. By mid-evening, the routine has trained the room. Pegs sit like tame teeth. The cord hums with attention, not appetite. The sand glass hisses honest grain. The board says crowns off after story in letters slippers can't ignore. You scrawl your 4 verbs one last time. Pegged, down, heard, set by. And look down the quiet seam you chalked at first light. Children carry their breath to the rail like it was a thing they were proud of not spilling. The bell and the horn do their duet. The lavender retires. The rest of the night can argue about dragons and roofs. Your job was to make sleep into a schedule and waking into mercy. Frost kisses the cot rail. Thaw wakes beneath the rushes. Ink in the horn goes sulky and sits until you warm it with your palm. You roll wax between finger and thumb for a hush strap that stiffened overnight. You nick a clogged quill for the tally until the nib sighs into duty. Then you put your heel into yesterday's seam. It lies politely, top firm, under soft. The nursery intends to be both treacherous and reasonable. At the gate, a market man rents his throat to a rumor. Princes keep crowns, servants lose sleep. He tries it 3 ways to see which buys him nods. The warden doesn't argue. He sets his palm on the hush cord so quiet looks nailed down. Warden's peace at the cordon, he says. Then to you, orders that make your wrists honest. Demonstration without spectacle. Move the cord in the open. First down at the novice beds. Chalk the board. Firm here, danger there. Crowns off after story, 7 breaths in halls where slippers must see it. From the chapel door, the sacrist adds what your shoulders already know. No clatter, compline. Your morning becomes a shuttle of small courtesies. Hush cord, cot lane, bell table, back and forth until the rushes decide they are being watched. You cradle 2 spare crowns under canvas so they don't look like extra heads for sale. You peg where the frost stayed loyal, ease where the thaw began to lie, stamp the seam yourself so the first slipper won't be surprised. You pull the cord out in a shallow arc and pin it straight while everyone looks. Geometry calms people faster than speeches. Then the choice that buys you critics either way. Post the chord shift first, clean, visible arithmetic, and townsmen cry favoritism. See, princes get firm straw by the chair, servants get slick rush by the door. Post the rotation list first, needier fare, and the chamberlain fumes. You're teaching people their place matters more than their form. Meanwhile, if a passerby spies blue ribbon crowns laid near the chair, he'll shout cheat instead of rule. You pick your order. Path first, promise second. Chord moved in the open, peg taps, chord hums, chalk rings down the lane. Rotation posted immediately after. White story to near seam 2, blue whisper to seam 3, yellow water last. 7 breaths in halls chalked above. A clerk from the captain's table appears with a rota torn down the spine by a thumb that wanted to be a palm. Paste, thread, the little iron he keeps under his cuff against 6 rules and a superstition. You hold a corner while he stitches the day back together. The iron thinks about performing, the sacrist glances over and murmurs no clatter, and the iron learns to whisper. The hush horn peals its low down, peg taps quiet themselves. The warden keeps his hand on the rope but does not pull. He lends it patience, not weight. You chalk the public plank by the door, firm here, danger there in a hand that refuses drama. Beneath, 2 columns the council learned last quarter to count. Down kept and strays arrested, words over the line. Ticks, 1 under down kept, novice beds, 3 held. 1 under strays. Orm muttered across the seam and met the staff rap for measure kept. You hang the joint ban where slippers must see it to pass. Crowns off after stories 7 breaths in halls. The cellarer hisses move at a knot of shoulders that thought they were a conversation. A child at the outer ring sags at the hush, breath getting ahead of courage. You steady their elbow with your sleeve and tap their shoulder twice. Set feet, breathe. Close, you lend the pocket drill in a seam meant for quiet, not heroics. They nod at the chalk ring 2 paces back and forgive their own throat. First down happens where it should. Novice beds, white ribbons on the rail, take 3 backs and 4 elbows. The sandglass whispers and becomes law. 1, 2, 3, lavender passes. 4, 5 pounce settles. 6, staff rap. 7, bell. First down wakes first. The room learns to fear a sloppy breath more than it fears thunder. Blue ribbon crowns whisper from under canvas like temptation. You hang them last, in daylight, far enough from the chair that nobody can pretend arrangement is favoritism. A passerby opens his mouth for cheat. Rule, you say without moving your teeth, and the arithmetic supports you. A friar palms you a chit from the governess, wax attempting to make favor into law. Open by order, the face lies. Nearer chord for a certain bed, the whisper means. You slide it under the tally where paper goes to learn patience until it dies of it. The apothecary shuffles along the chord selling a sentence. Peas and felt save bowels, mint saves mouths, a 7 count saves throat. He's right often enough to be tolerated. You flip the glass for the next down and watch barley become law again. 2 cots try to trade places. Habit outruns instruction. You redress the lane in shadow while a lantern crawls closer. Half files trade, a sleeve tug, a palm down, a quiet hold for the one who thinks volume counts as measure. The chord stays true. The tide of yawns keeps pretending it planned this. The market man tries his line again. Princes keep crowns, servants lose sleep. You let him watch the chord you moved and the rota you posted. Novice beds first, captain's page third, pantry scullion after, water at yellow, whisper at blue. You say nothing. Demonstration without spectacle does the talking. The chapel bell lifts a hush even the gulls respect. You read the board aloud for the edge of the crowd that pretends letters are for other people. Firm here, danger there. Down kept, 1. Strays arrested, 1. Sureties for good order at mid-bell, crowns off 7 breaths. A herald's trumpet from the yard slices rising talk into pieces too small to hire. The chamberlain flicks his eyes from chord to rota to blue crowns, hung last and decides, visibly, not to be angry. A priest catches chalk sigils blooming on a cot rail and says, no charms. Device, not charm, you note in your book and wipe them off with rosemary water. The rail smells like restraint. The bell kisses the dais and the room wakes into order again. The warden's hand remains on the rope. content to be seen in the right place without needing to pull. If it were your hour, if the warden ordered demonstration without spectacle, what posts first, cord first, or rotation first? Put it, and where you're watching from below. I count them when the pounce dust washes from my fingers, and the hush cord asks whether it belongs on the rushes again. By mid-morning, the proof looks like furniture, cord where eyes watched it be moved. Novice beds first, blue crowns hung last and honest. The board says firm here, danger there, and nobody pretends not to read. The horn peals down, the bell lifts up. Children breathe where chalk told them to, and talk when barley agreed. The hall decides to behave. Torches gutter and make the nursery corridor look smaller than it was at dusk. Gates bar with that elbow-deep clunk that ends the day whether anyone agrees. Word keeps its own hours and hires a chorus as it slips past the cord. Perfume for princes, sour soup for nurses. The square likes a rhyme when it thinks it was cheated of a nearer bed. Inside, the hall meets by candle to do what halls are for, turn mockery into policy. The beetle taps your plank twice with the stick that believes it writes law. Copy fair, copy fast. Flawless. You square the sheet. The quill behaves because your hand has learned not to consult your feelings. Public notice. Quiet passage to and from the cord. You write it where slippers must read before mouths can improvise. Alms fines for broken pegs and barred roars. Novice beds dressed first. On paper, orders to post days range, wind, and water pause at dusk so rumor wakes up unemployed. You leave small doors the household needs to breathe. Save collapse. Save fever. Save order under strain. Sand hisses. The line goes matte. Before it dries, a flare blooms in the shed. Orange climbs faster than sense. You and 2 pages are already moving. Buckets find your hands as if they were born there. Wet wool hisses on embered planks. The line at the outer bar forgets its lyrics long enough to watch flame learn manners. Rosemary and vinegar go back to their quieter work of smelling like discipline. Back at the plank, the beetle plants a knuckle in your margin. A small slip slides under your thumb with the practiced innocence of a profitable sin. Keep this quiet, the neat hand says. You tuck it under the ledger and rest your palm until paper remembers filing is a kind of death. Omit it forever, your bone tells your nerve. Your nerve sits. A coin rings on your plank and refuses to shine. The scullery maid stands with shoulders like broom handles and a voice built to carry 5 words. Leave the seed alone. Not loud. Truer than the jeer outside. You point your pen at the clause that teaches exceptions not to breed and write what the corridor needed to learn, seed spared in frost and foul wind, distraint only on clear novice petitions on seed first. The beetle coughs at the line that will cost him a friend. You keep the curve of the S steady, as if dignity could be written into vowels. Under the guest stair, a trap yawns. Men step down with private purses and come up with lighter pockets and better stories. Extra pegs, extra pillows. A porter has discovered he likes counting with his palm. You lift the hatch with a peg just enough to count and close it on a promise your shoulder can pay for in the morning. 2 more pegs gone than posted. 2 fewer pillows returned than sworn. The cellarer's hand lands on your shoulder with the weight of a nail. Make it wood, his thumb says. You nod. Boards can learn policy. You carry the fresh notice to the bar. Key rings stacked like teeth on the usher's belt chatter when the cartwheel squeals its old grievance, and then purrs after someone shames it with grease. You nail the paper where hands can't pretend they weren't told. A drum under the stair gives the words a spine. Suspense settles behind you like a gull. If the jeers aren't answered, the outer bar will try to be a song. If you answer wrong, your name slides onto the slate the clerk keeps oiled, to be silenced. Either way, the queue of yawns won't wait. Tomorrow's dusk needs a script more than you need applause. Inside, tallies of peg immersements line up under your pencil. Recognizances with awkward crosses shiver into the docket. Some firm, some sideways. Some made by hands that prefer mops to quills. Rosemary and vinegar steam lift the room's patience a half-inch. The astrologer drifts in, declares the hour lucky if men stop talking, then shoves the lucky hour forward with his thumb when clouds thicken. Nobody pays him. He pretends the sky did. A patron's runner offers a folded chit with wax that confuses polish for law. Open by order, it claims, chin high at your margin. You lay it under the same palm that smothered the Beatles' slip and let paper learn to die politely. Now the contested name. It warms your pocket like a small stove. A lordling whose cousin stands too often under the arch with the chamberlain expects the close chord rotation as if it were inheritance. He doesn't belong there. Another name does. The maid whose night you just saved, the page whose 7 count steadied 3 beds. Erase or obey. Unlock or relock. You lay the bad name on the plank over the rosemary tack and let friction pretend to be fate. You set him aside. You write the other in a hand the nursery has learned to trust and punish. Your handwriting is where mercy lives. The corridor will teach you later what it costs to be recognized by your letters. Wet wool keeps hissing on the shed floor. The maid's coin keeps ringing dull in your pocket. The beetle keeps coughing at the worst line. The astrologer keeps shoving the lucky hour along as clouds thicken. You keep copying. Quiet passage. Alms finds. Novice beds first. Range, wind, water pause at dusk. By the door, the cellaret has a mouth for paid erasures. You walk past it and count aloud to your slate. Extra pegs, extra pillows. The cellarer's thumb presses your shoulder like a promise with hardware. Make it wood. You nod. Morning will learn carpentry. You read the notice aloud because policy grows up when it hears itself. Quiet passage. Fines for broken pegs and barred roars. Novice beds dressed first. Ranges, wind, water pause at dusk. The cartwheel squeals once more and then concedes to grease. Vinegar coins clink in ladles. Key rings chatter like teeth. If it were your plank, if a sister's coin rang dull where your sand still dried, if a patron's slip asked your margin to forget itself, if a name in your pocket insisted on warmth it hadn't earned, what would you write, omit, or obey? Put it, and where you're watching from below. I read them when the pounce dust washes from my fingers, and the hush chord asks whether it belongs on the rushes again. You knot the notice where the drum can keep it company. You file the coin in the dish that will be the only place tonight where money does what it's told. You file the chits in the drawer that kills them softly. You leave the contested name where rosemary can keep it from sticking to your hand again. You bank the brazier. Torches gutter, gates bar. The nursery smells like ink that decided to be honest and smoke that learned restraint. Outside, a town is learning quiet rules by cord and chalk instead of knives and shouting. That is the price of quiet on paper, and the tide will keep the bargain. Dawn unlatches the nursery wing. Trumpets wet their lips, drums remember yesterday's beat, and hand it back to a house that hasn't earned music yet. The velvet voice climbs its little crate by the buttery bar and nails the hour to the cord. Their graces commend those who kept quiet order at the cord and cot. Ranges are chalked because a bargain in ink said they must. Windows stand open not from virtue but because a rule learned how to turn air into policy. The brazier glows the way a good tool glows, only because the order allowed it, not because anyone needs to admire it. The market man with the myth strides free as air, trying a new sentence on the light and deciding to save it for a paying crowd. A midwife's lintel wears a yellow tag instead of red. Someone wrote the exception, and someone else obeyed it. Near the steps, a widow folds to the cobbles. 2 strangers make a chair of their hands and lift her as if the town had rehearsed it, which it has. The velvet voice finishes the page. People accept being commended because it costs them nothing at this hour. Your errands carry edges. You are final witness and courier of consequences. First duplicate to the steward, quiet passage to and from the cord, alms fines for broken pegs and barred roars, novice beds dressed first, day's range, wind, and water pause to be posted at dusk. He signs with a letter that doesn't blush and gives you the small look you've been earning all week. I saw. Second to the captain, the dry rhoda, the seam stitched by the clerk's little iron, the tally, down-kept, strays arrested. Arithmetic she prefers to adjectives. She nods and spares you both a speech. To the guild, hung where money pretends to learn manners. A snowfall of paper that settles dust without cleaning blood. Over yesterday's shut-ups for false oath, a muster sheet for the king's levy is pinned, wide as appetite. names but at the lower edge where pride and debt keep their appointment. You finally understand what toy crowns bought. Not glamour, but obedience. Not luxury, but lanes that move. Bellies steady, roofs that don't leak. And a harvest of men promised for later, because a straight cord is useful to more than lullabies. The dry rota hangs over the board, close cord, far cord, dry strap first, with the calm you wished for last week. Vinegar coins clink in ladles at the chest, chests of fines grown into carts and purr after somebody shames the wheels with grease. A parchment marked misadventure for a slip at wet flags goes into the docket, a lie with a warm heart that keeps the morning cheap. The last rosemary bundle smolders to ash. The priest who warned off chalk charms watches it die and decides to respect devices publicly for a week. Then your coat remembers it has a drawer. The secret slate of spared turns. 3 small tyrants you moved to yellow water when their jaws made trouble. The side list of moves you allowed against orders in the dark hour, when thaw lied under frost and sense outranked command. Leak, burn, or file, you hold both like hot bread. Leak would be honest and brief, you would be too. It would splash in the yard like a good sin and die when nobody could afford to adopt it. Burn would be quick and teach you nothing but how to run colder. File is the story this corner survives by, proof where questions with hats can find it, nowhere near mouths with errands. You slide slate and list into the drawer under the ledger, and listen for the click that promises a better hour will be allowed to ask you why. File. The steward finds you the way enamel always does. He offers a badge to mark more wisely, as if clarity were a party trick you refuse to perform. The guildmaster occupies the shade near your shoulder and offers sanctuary till the pest passes, the sort of dangerous kindness that fits under a cloak. The sheriff passes and gives you what he does best in your direction. Not nothing, not much. I saw. You answer all 3 with what you own. Keys, cord, brazier, silence. Hear your wrists say. You keep your post. Public reading by the bar begins again because velvet likes 3s. The drum puts a spine under the notice. The captain's clerk flits in to finger the knot on the rota, decides it will hold and vanishes. Before the market man can hire his breath, the sacrist rubs his palm along the chapel door and decides the wood can keep quiet without supervision. The cellarer hisses move at a shadow out of habit. A runner from the alderman tries you with a new chit. Open by order, the wax whispers in a humbler tone than yesterday's. You rest it under your palm and let your hand decide. Omit. You chalk a dot on your wrist to remind yourself who deserves your braver voice later, the widow whose seed you spared, and the minder whose 7 counts steadied 3 beds. Rules are supposed to keep people alive, not busy. If you had to choose, soft under a patron's livery or hard under sanctuary eaves, what keeps you whole, livery or sanctuary? Put it, and where you're watching from below, I count them after the last pounce dust leaves my fingers and the cord asks whether it belongs on the rushes again. By noon the extracts have turned into furniture. People lean on them and forget when paper had to prove itself. The levy clerk learns to keep his line moving without explaining his face. The market man tests a fresh myth and discovers grief has better ears than appetite. The board holds. The cord stays true. The nap order warms from hands, not iron. The line breathes without you needing to give it a mouth. Justice this week was airflow and cord budget. Mercy was policy, not indulgence. Survival was choreography of chalk, pegs, sandglass, rosemary, and staves performed by people who don't need to be sung about to do it again. You were the hinge. You coil the slack. You pocket the keys. You bank the brazier. The horn will say down, the bell will say up, and the cord will mean speak. The tide will keep its bargain if you keep yours.